Hello humans, I've got a new toy that I want to show you because I'm very excited about it. This is the Dirtywave M8. Let's get a close-up of this guy right here. Yeah, I like that. The Dirtywave M8 is a handheld music tracker, which is to say, it's a very tiny device that you can sequence music on. A lot of people historically have used trackers for chiptune music. I think the tracker concept first came out on the Amiga back in the day. With this particular device, it's really kind of mimicking the LSDJ workflow. So let me kind of give you a brief overview. We've got 8 tracks, and these are oriented vertically. And this view might kind of remind you of session view in Ableton, which is to say that each track is oriented horizontally, and each of these squares is a loop in that track. So on track 1 here, I have a kick drum, here I have snares. And I can launch this whole row by hitting play. And you can see these green arrows to indicate that these loops are playing. And it is playing through its built-in speakers here that you might not be able to see that well. There we go. It has built-in speakers. And as it progresses through the track, those green markers go down to indicate that it has moved down. So to dive in from there, let's say I wanted to edit this loop. I could hold the shift, which is kind of the navigation button, and then move the cursors. As I move to the right, you'll see that this icon down here in the bottom right, this is kind of the map. And so I've got my song view, I've got my chains, which are the loops, or they're the bars. So we can see in this loop right here, I've got 8 bars, and then I can dive down into any of those bars by going one more over. And then here's the phrase, which is a phrase is 16 steps or 1 bar. And I can navigate through all 8 of those 16 step phrases. At this point, I can begin to edit the thing. So I've got the notes that I'm playing over here on the leftmost column. I've got the velocity on this column. Over here, I've got the instrument. Now you can change the instrument per step. So I could load up the kick and play that on some of these steps, load up hats and play those on the in-between steps, and put the snare on the backbeat all on one track. And that's something that's kind of, you might be used to in like an Electron workflow, something like on the Digitact or the Digitone, where you can change the loaded patch per step. And you can do a very similar thing here just by changing the instrument. So if I were to hold this, I can change that just for that one step. And that's one of the ways that a tracker is really powerful, is that you tend to be able to make these kinds of changes per step. And in that way, it's kind of akin to the Electron workflow, where you can do parameter locks per step. Now, speaking of parameter locks, if I move over to these 3 columns over here, these are the effects columns. And effects aren't necessarily what you might be thinking of, like delay or reverb, although it can control those. These are more just the general parameters of the instruments, and you can change those per step. For example, I'm on effects 1 right here. If I hold this and then dive into the menu, I can see all of the different parameters that I have. I can load up any of these effects and then change the value, and I can do that on a per step basis. And each step has 3 of these effects that I can load up. On top of that, I can also dive down a little deeper into the table. Now a table is kind of like the effects here in the phrase. Instead, these run a lot faster. These actually run faster than per step. As you can see, every time there's a trigger, it restarts and it flows downward at a much faster rate. Okay, so now let's talk about the instrument. So here we have the instrument page. Now up here on type, I can cycle through the various different kinds of instruments available to me. So this very first one is the wave synth. Now this is a chiptune style synthesizer. So down here we have different kinds of shapes. You've got pulse wave, you've got saw, triangle, sine, noise, pitch noise, and overflow, which is it just finds a random spot in the memory and reads that as if it were a waveform, which can sound pretty noisy and random. It changes all the time. One past that, the next instrument we have is the macro synth. So the macro synth is the software from the Eurorack module from Mutable Instruments Braids. He's taken that software, which is open sourced, and dropped it right into here. Now with that, you have all of the different algorithms. You've got seesaw, morph, there's tons of algorithms in here. And so you have all of those different sounds that Braids, which is probably one of the most popular Eurorack modules, I would imagine. You've got all of those options in here, and it gets very deep. On top of that, you've also got filter, a low pass, high pass, band pass, all of these different filter options, and that's on each of the instruments. You have that on WaveSynth and all the others. So let's go to the next one. We've got our sampler here. The sampler is really powerful. It's easily as powerful as something like the Digitact, where you can go in here and you can load up a single sample that has a bunch of slices in it. If they're evenly spaced, you can just load them up here and you can go up to 128 slices, which is kind of ridiculous. It streams all of these samples directly off the SD card, so you don't have to worry about like how many samples you're loading on or how big they are with some other hardware. You can just stream it straight off the card. This is kind of akin to the Octatrack, where you don't really have to worry about the size of your samples as long as you're streaming them off the card. That being said, you do have to kind of be particular about the SD card that you purchase to go along with this. If you get the production model, it's going to come with an SD card that's going to work fine, but you can't just buy a good SD card and expect it to work well. You probably want to reference the website. Tim, the developer of the M8, has done some testing and has narrowed down a few SD cards that work well with this machine, and you want to pay particular attention to that because you will have problems if you don't. That being said, you've got all kinds of playback options. You can go forward, reverse looping, ping pong, and whatnot. You've got your length, loop start, detune, degrade. You got your filter, as well as these common parameters that are on all of the instruments, such as your amp, the clipping style of the amp. You got your pan, your dry output, chorus, delay, and reverb sends. So the last instrument, the last kind of synthesizer we have is the FM synth. Now, likewise, this is a really powerful FM synthesizer. One of the key features is it's a 4-op FM synth, and each of the operators has a selectable waveform. So this is more akin to something like the Digitone, or maybe even the Yamaha DX27, I believe it is, the 4-operator synth with variable kind of waveforms. Now this has that where you can set up each operator to have a different waveform, and you've got 11 different algorithms to mess with. Lots of variation there, and you'll be able to kind of conjure up quite a bit of FM goodness. And lastly, we have the MIDI output. Now MIDI output, we have control over the MIDI channel, banks, program, and you've got 10 MIDI CCs that you can manipulate here. Now the nice thing about this is you can save all of these as your own presets up here. So let's say you've got a particular piece of gear like a Moog or something. You look up all your CC parameters, you program it in here, and you save it as your Moog, and you can just load that up when you're ready to play with it. That makes it really easy to simply swap out instruments. So when you're back here in your phrase, you can program it all with one kind of onboard synthesis. But when you're ready to plug it into your gear at home, you can just change the instruments out to your MIDI instrument, and all of your programming is still there, and you can just run. You can just hit the ground running. Not to mention just how deep you can get with song mode here. There's just pages and pages of rows to play with. So you can program out like a whole set just from your song mode here and just move right down like you might do with like Session View in Ableton. You can just keep going because everything streams right off the SD card, so you don't really have to worry about running out of space. So to wrap this up, I think this thing's really powerful. The form factor, having this compact little thing that you can just put in your pocket, comes with this nice little carrying case. So you can just pop it in here, throw it in your bag, throw it in your pocket, whatever. Take it with you, play with it on your lunch break, play with it on the toilet. Wherever you are, you can work on your music whenever inspiration strikes you, which I think is really powerful. Oftentimes, by the time I get all of my gear set up and synced and cables plugged in and everything, my inspiration spark has kind of faded, and I don't really get that problem with this guy. I can just unzip this, load up a new project, and just get going with it. And then once I flushed out the idea and I feel like I'm ready to start introducing my hardware to it, I can just sit down, plug it in, and just take those ideas and transfer them over to my gear. The song view on it really reminds me of the arrangement view in the Octatrack, which is by far the most powerful arrangement view or song mode in any of the Electron gear. And it's the thing that I usually use to program my tracks out with. I use my Octatrack as my brain for my whole hardware setup. And I think in the future, I'll probably be using this in place of the Octatrack quite a bit more. And maybe just using the Octatrack more for its specialty performance purposes of like sample mangling, the kind of things that you can only do on the Octatrack. If you're interested in finding out more about this device, you should take a look at the Dirtywave M8 webpage. There you'll be able to find a link to the headless version. You can check out one of these little guys right here. This is the Teensy 4.1. What is it? Yeah, Teensy 4.1. I'll leave a link in the description below. This is essentially the brain for the M8. And so having this guy to test run it on is really powerful, and it'll leave you salivating for the real thing. Check that out if you're more interested. Anyhow, I'm going to play us out. I'll see you next time.